one of the things I think your book is a great companion to Robert's book because while it's the story of your relation, I mean, you certainly capture Robert, who I knew very well. But it also deals a lot with the mechanics of how you get stories, which Robert doesn't do so much of in the book. And I'd like to begin with, as both of you do in your books, with this the shooting down of the Iranian Airbus by the Vincennes, the American warship. I believe in your book you talk about it having a profound impact on you. And one of the things I want you to do is not only describe what happened, but and this is just typifies almost every story you and Robert covered, the lies that are told to cover up the reality.
Yeah, I think we were on holiday in Ireland when we heard that the Americans had shot down a civilian airliner flying over the Persian Gulf. And we basically raced to the airport, got on the first flight to Dubai, and there were packs of journalists there, all trying to get to Iran to cover the tragedy. Well, it was actually Robert would dislike me calling it a tragedy. It was a war crime, really. The Iranian embassy kept, wouldn't give any visas, wouldn't let anyone travel, and this went on for maybe 2 or 3 days. And we spent a whole night trying to get a boat across the Persian Gulf. And Robert at one point saw all of his colleagues, all of his competition, sail away towards Iran without him because they wouldn't let me on the boat because I had a US passport, and there was a different regulation for Brits. And he said, "Do you know how much I love you? I just saw all my competition sail away without me." And he told me it was one of the hardest decisions he'd ever made in journalism. So we went back to our hotel, I think it was the International Hotel in Dubai, very near the airport. And we were pretty exhausted. We'd been up all night, bedraggled. And somebody ran into the lobby of the hotel saying, "The Iranians are sending a plane. The Iranians are sending a plane." So we raced to the airport, got on a civilian airliner, not unlike the one which the Americans had just shot down a few days before, flew to Bandar Abbas. The Iranians took all the journalists who were on the plane, dozens and dozens of us, to a cold storage warehouse where the bodies of if my memory is correct, I think it was 263 people had been killed. And there were piles of, they were lined up, the women in one row, the men in another area, and then the people who they weren't able to put back together or didn't have recognizable parts of, there were just parts, arms, legs, body organs piled up. It was pretty horrific. And it was starting to smell because several days had passed. And I remember 2 bodies in particular. There was one of the Revolutionary Guards said to me, "You're a woman, so you're allowed to look at her," because they wouldn't let men look at an Iranian woman, even dead. And they they were all sort of wrapped up in like plastic sheeting, and they unwrapped the plastic around her. And there was a really beautiful woman with chestnut-colored hair, and she looked quite peaceful. I'd say she was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. I can still remember her face, and that was 1988. How many years is that? 46 years, something like that. And then the other one I remember really well was a 3-year-old girl called Leila Bepehani. I even remember her name, who'd been on her way to a wedding, and she was wearing a pale blue dress and little black patent leather shoes and tiny earrings, and her face was all screwed up. She was crying, so she obviously realized something was wrong when she died. And so after showing us this carnage, the Iranians took us to the former Intercontinental Hotel in Bandar Abbas, and they prepared this big feast of, I think it was roast lamb. And I don't need to tell you how sick I felt to the stomach, having just been looking at all these dead bodies and smelling dead bodies, which smell a bit like lamb. And so Robert and I were pretty horrified at this big feast they'd put on for us. And most of the journalists went in and sat down and ate lunch. And Robert, this is one example of his incredible inventiveness as a journalist. Started chatting to the receptionist in the hotel, and he said, you must have a telex machine. And they said, yes. And he said, oh, could I just say hello to the telex operator? And we went behind the reception desk, and Robert started sweet talking the telex operator, who spoke English. And he got, asked permission, sat down at the telex machine, and started writing his front page story directly onto the telex machine, which amazed me. It really did. And then, sure enough, the hotel pulled the plug on the telex after a few minutes, but he must have got 200 or 300 words out anyway. And then we went they took us back to the airport to fly back to Dubai. And Robert found a coin telephone machine. Remember when we had pay telephones? And he managed to get Iranian coins from someone. And the figures, of course, are the same in Farsi as in Arabic. They're Arabic numerals. So he wrote down the phone number, which was on the machine, called the switchboard he was still with the Times then in London, and said, call me back on this number. They called him back, and he started dictating the rest of his story to London. The Iranians had given none of us access to any kind of communication whatsoever. And Robert's colleagues were furious that he had a front page story when they did not. We then flew back to Dubai in the middle of the night. I was shattered because we'd had 2 nights without sleep. And most of the journalists were just kind of, lying back in their seats, trying to recover their senses. Robert crept into the cockpit and interviewed the pilot of the first Iranian aircraft to make the exact same journey from Bandar Abbas to Dubai since the USS Vincennes had shot down the Airbus. And so we got a second brilliant story out of it. The next day, the Times of London had been bought by Rupert Murdoch, who, as you know, is very conservative, also owns the Wall Street Journal, Fox News. I don't need to say more by way of explanation. Robert's foreign editor said, apparently it was a suicide airliner. And Robert said, that's utter bullshit. It was a civilian airliner. I've seen the dead civilians who died on it. And the pilot he had just interviewed knew the pilot of the Iranian Airbus. And he said, he had also found some expert in Dubai who said that the pilot had also told him that the military transponder on the USS Vincennes could not communicate with the civilian airliner. They were on different frequencies. They could not hear each other because the Americans kept saying, we warned them, we warned them, we warned them, and they didn't respond to our warnings. Therefore, they shot them down.
They also said the plane was descending towards the ship.
Yeah, they made it up. They completely made it up. And so Robert I witnessed this argument in our hotel room in Dubai. He was yelling at his foreign editor and saying, this is utter bullshit. I forbid you to publish this. And this eventually led to his resignation from the London Times and to his employment by the London Independent for the last 2 or 3 decades of his life. Just this argument over the USS Vincennes. And it all, the subsequent investigations showed that Robert was absolutely right. It was a civilian airliner. It was not descending. And what had happened was that Captain Will Rogers III was in the toilet when his men saw this aircraft on their radar screens. And they didn't know what to do. And they were I think they were yelling at him through the toilet door. There's a plane coming at us. What do we do? What do we do? Fire on it, And they did. And they killed 263 people in cold blood. And what was really, really scandalous, is that the crew of the USS Vincennes were decorated. They received medals of valor for having shot down a civilian airliner.
Yeah, and I believe the captain was promoted.
He was. There was years later. There was, I think it was his wife's car in San Diego, California, had a bomb placed in it.
Right.
I don't think she was hurt, but that also showed the sort of the long arm of Iran and its allies in the Middle East.
So the reason I wanted to begin with that story is because it illustrates several points that come out in the book. First, how flagrantly those in authority everywhere lie. Israel lies like it breathes, but so does the United States. Second of all, it illustrates, he has a quote in the book, he's quoting somebody about how you need a little literary ability and rat-like cunning, which is so true.
Nicholas Tomlin, a British correspondent who was killed in I believe, the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. Yes. And Robert always said, especially rat-like cunning.
Well, especially rat-like cunning is correct. When I covered the Ceausescu revolution, same thing. You couldn't get a phone line for some weird reason in Ceausescu's Romania. Kent cigarettes were used as currency. So I went down to the hotel operators, gave them all cartons of Kent, and then, again, they used Deutschmark, not dollars, and said that, I know how hard they worked, and they weren't being paid very well. I can see Robert doing exactly this, and that whenever they had to call the International Phone Exchange to get an open line, which could take a very long time. And I said, look, every time you get an open line, call my room, and I'll if I use it, I'll give you 10 Deutschmark. So every international call that came into the hotel, and all the bottom windows had been shot out by the Securitate, went to my room. I never had any problem filing my stories, but when I went down to the dining room, all the foreign correspondents were enraged because they were waiting hours for an open line. This is a classic example of rat-like cunning and why you need it. And of course, Robert exhibited this in spades.